All right, so are you ready to travel back in time with us a bit? Because today we're taking a deep dive straight into the heart of 1930s Alabama, specifically the fictional town of Macomb.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We're diving into Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and seeing everything through the eyes of our narrator, the young Scout Finch.
Using childhood innocence as a lens to look at some really complex stuff like racism, social injustice, and moral growth. I'm really curious to see how this unfolds.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Now, Lee describes Macomb as this tired old town, like with streaks that turn into red mud when it rains.
Right.
And then there's that stifling southern heat. You can almost feel it as you're reading.
Yeah, it's definitely vivid, but there's also this sense of timelessness, like things never really changing there no matter what the weather is like. It's almost like that stagnation is on purpose, like it
Yeah.
reinforces the societal norms that are so important to the story.
Oh, you're already picking up on Lee's subtle hints there. It's
Yeah.
like the town itself is another character stuck in its ways.
Yeah, for sure.
But then there's Finch's Landing, the Finch family's homestead. It's almost completely self-sufficient,
Oh.
almost the opposite of Macomb's dependence on the outside world.
That's a really stark contrast. It makes you wonder if Finch's Landing represents like a different set of values,
Uh-huh.
a different way of life, maybe, one that challenges Macomb's way of doing things.
That's a great point. It's like their home shows how independent they are.
Right.
Speaking of the Finches, we have to talk about Atticus.
Yeah.
He's Scout and Jem's widowed father. He's a lawyer, but Lee makes it clear that he's a lot more than that. It's like he's the moral compass in a town that's lost its way.
Atticus is so interesting because he's not like this huge hero. He's just human,
Yeah.
But he has these very strong principles.
Yeah.
It makes his choices, especially when he decides to defend Tom Robinson, so much more compelling.
Exactly. It really makes you think, would we be as brave as Atticus in a situation like that?
Right.
Now, to add a bit more lightheartedness to the mix, there's Dill. He's the kid's summertime friend, and he's all about imagination and mischief.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big contrast to the more serious themes that we see throughout the book.
But Dill's role is more than just being funny, don't you think? He's kind of an outsider, He sees Macomb without all that baggage of its history and prejudice. He's almost like, he's almost like the reader
Right.
experiencing this world for the first time.
You're totally right. Now, you can't talk about Macomb without mentioning the Radley place.
Oh,
It's
right.
this rundown house that everyone in town has all these crazy stories about.
Yeah.
And it's where Boo Radley lives, the recluse that everyone seems to be so scared of.
The Radley place is more than just a creepy setting, though. It represents the unknown, the things that people are afraid of but don't really understand. It's where prejudice and small town gossip grow,
Uh-huh.
turning someone just a bit different into something like a monster.
And of course, the kids are completely fascinated by it, right?
Right.
They even come up with this game called Boo Radley, where they're always trying to get him to come out of his house. It's this weird mix of fear and morbid curiosity.
I always found it so interesting how Lee shows these little acts of kindness that come from the Radley place, despite everyone being so scared of it. Like the pants that were mended and left on the fence,
Uh-huh.
or the gifts hidden in the knothole of the tree. It's like she's hinting that things aren't always what they seem. Even someone who is totally rejected by everyone else might actually have a lot of depth.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got this seemingly perfect southern town, but then everything changes with the Tom Robinson trial.
Oh, right.
Atticus is assigned to defend Tom, who's a black man wrongly accused of assaulting a white woman.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden the town's carefully built facade starts to crumble.
The trial is definitely a huge turning point, right?
Yeah.
Macomb is forced to confront all of its racism and hypocrisy. It's not just a courtroom drama. It shows all the racial tensions that were everywhere in the Jim Crow South.
And it's where Bob Ewell, the bad guy, makes his first appearance.
Right.
He is truly a terrible person.
Ewell represents everything that's wrong with Macomb. Just raw, unmasked prejudice. He embodies that mob mentality that's all about keeping the social order no matter the cost.
And the trial has a huge impact on everyone. Even Atticus's passionate closing argument about equality before the law can't convince the jury.
It's so sad.
They find Tom guilty, and it sends shockwaves through the entire town.
It just shows how ingrained prejudice is, even when there's reason and a ton of evidence pointing in another direction. It makes you question what justice even means,
It definitely does. But even with all the bad stuff, there's still some hopeful things.
Oh, yeah.
Like characters such as Miss Maudie and Mr. Underwood. They openly support both Atticus and Tom. It shows that even in a place that seems so backward, some people are willing to stand up against the crowd.
Those characters are so important. They show that change is possible. Even if there's a ton of opposition, individual acts of courage and compassion can still make a difference.
That's such a powerful thought. Okay, so then the story takes us to Halloween night, where Bob Ewell gets really angry.
Oh, no.
And he attacks Jem and Scout.
Oh, wow.
But guess who saves them?
Who?
It's Boo Radley. What a twist, right?
Wow.
It's almost like something out of Shakespeare. The character we were supposed to be scared of actually turns out to be the one who saves the day. It forces us to look at our own assumptions. Maybe the people we think are so different from us are actually really brave and compassionate. It's such a clever way to turn our expectations upside down. And Scout, in a moment of real empathy, she sees Boo not as a monster like everyone else says he is, but as a shy man who's been kind to them in his own way.
That scene is so well done.
Yeah.
It's Lee's way of showing that true understanding comes from seeing things from someone else's perspective, from realizing that everyone has humanity, no matter their social standing or how different they seem.
Now, we have to talk about Aunt Alexandra. She shows up in Maycomb all of a sudden and tries to force Scout and Jem to care about their family's social status. It's like she's everything that Atticus is fighting against.
Aunt Alexandra represents that old way of thinking, that belief in social hierarchy and tradition that never changes.
Right.
She's the opposite of Atticus, showing the tension between clinging to the past and trying to create a fairer future.
It's fascinating how Lee uses her character to show all those prejudices that Atticus is fighting against.
Yeah,
It adds so much depth to the story, making us think about our own biases.
for sure.
She disapproves of Calpurnia, who's the family's black housekeeper, and that's super revealing, don't you think? It highlights the deep racism that was everywhere in the South, all those social rules that kept black and white people separate.
It's scary to think that prejudice was just built into everyday life like that.
Totally. And her fights with Atticus about how to raise the kids also show this big difference between them. Atticus encourages Scout and Jem to think for themselves, question authority, and care about people who are different. But Aunt Alexandra, she's all about conformity and social status, just keeping things the way they are.
It's like she's trying to turn Scout and Jem into the kind of people who would actually perpetuate those same injustices that Atticus is working so hard to fight.
Exactly. It's such a subtle but powerful message about how prejudice can just be passed down from one generation to the next.
It makes Atticus's role as a father even more crucial. He's not just fighting for justice in the courtroom, he's also fighting to teach his kids values like empathy, compassion, and courage. Hopefully those values are what will lead to a better and more equal future.
It reminds us that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes challenging those ingrained beliefs that everyone has, facing uncomfortable truths, and raising a new generation who will hopefully continue fighting for progress.
Wow, that's so true.
So we've covered a lot already, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface of this incredible story.
Totally agree.
Before we go any deeper, I want to hear from you, the listeners. What has stuck out to you so far? What resonated the most?
You know what's really struck me? It's how slowly Lee unfolds the story.
Yeah.
It's almost like she wants us to really appreciate every detail and become completely immersed in Maycomb before the trial even starts.
It's true. That gradual buildup makes the impact of the trial so much more powerful.
It's such a clever way to tell the story, drawing us in with this warmth and humor and all these vivid descriptions of what it's like to be a kid, and then suddenly, bam, we're hit with the harsh realities of prejudice and injustice.
And even in those really dark moments, there's always this thread of hope, the possibility of change, shown through characters like Atticus, Miss Maudie, and even Boo Radley.
It's this reminder that even in a world where so much is wrong, good things can still happen.
And that's something that never gets old, does it?
Nope.
We've only just started our exploration of To Kill a Mockingbird. We still have so much more to talk about, so stick with us as we keep going deeper into this timeless classic.
You know, it's so interesting how Lee connects those two seemingly separate storylines. The Boo Radley one and Tom Robinson's trial, they're like, well, they both reflect different sides of prejudice and injustice.
Now that you mention it, they do kind of mirror each other.
Right.
It's like Lee's making a point to connect the fear and suspicion people have about Boo with the racism that condemns Tom.
Exactly. The kids are scared of Boo because of all these rumors and stories. Just like the accusations against Tom are all rooted in racial prejudice and not wanting to see the truth.
Yeah.
It's like Maycomb has this habit of turning things it doesn't know into monsters, whether it's
Yeah.
a guy who keeps to himself or an innocent black man.
It's not just about what makes people afraid, is it? Boo and Tom, in their own different ways, they challenge those ideas people have about them.
Right.
Boo through those little acts of kindness he does.
Yeah.
And Tom, just by being a good guy, hardworking man, who dared to be kind to a white woman.
Their actions kind of mess with the stories that Maycomb has built up around them.
Right.
It's like Lee's saying that real courage is about defying expectations,
Uh-huh.
showing the human side that's there, underneath all the prejudice and fear.
And it all comes together on Halloween night.
Oh, yeah.
Boo, the so-called monster, becomes the hero. He saves Jem and Scout from Bob Yole's attack.
I know, right? It's like those two storylines finally meet and show us a deeper truth about what good and evil really are.
That scene is so powerful. It flips everything around.
It does.
It makes you think about how we judge people based on how they look or what we hear about them without really trying to understand who they are.
Right, right.
And how we often miss the real heroes, those little acts of courage and compassion that are happening all around us.
Lee's really good at playing with perspective in this book, isn't she?
Yeah.
She makes us question our own points of view. We see everything through Scout's innocent eyes, but as she grows up, she starts to understand Maycomb and its people better. And that forces us as readers to rethink our own judgments.
It's like we're on this journey of discovery with Scout.
Yeah.
We start with a childlike view of the world,
Uh-huh.
and then we gradually face the complicated and unfair parts of it.
And that's what makes the story so interesting, right?
Yeah.
We're always learning and changing how we see the characters.
Right.
It's all about unlearning and relearning, just like Scout.
It's true.
Hmm.
Lee doesn't try to hide how awful prejudice is, but she also shows us how, even in a society with so many flaws, there can be good and empathy.
Right.
That push and pull between darkness and light, that's what makes To Kill a Mockingbird so powerful and lasting.
It's a story that makes us look deeper, question what we believe, and consider how our own prejudices might be stopping us from seeing the truth.
And that brings us back to Atticus Finch.
Yeah.
He's the moral compass in this story, unyielding and strong. He stands for integrity in a town that seems to have lost its way.
He embodies that courage and compassion we all want, That willingness to fight for what's right, even when it's not popular, even when it means going against your own community.
He's not perfect, obviously.
Of course not.
But he's guided by this strong sense of justice and empathy.
Right.
And he never gives up on doing what he believes is right.
And he has a huge influence on Scout and Jem.
Right.
They see his unwavering integrity, how committed he is to the truth, and how he's willing to fight for those who are marginalized, even if it costs him personally. Those are the lessons that shape their morals.
Yeah.
And inspire them to challenge all the injustice they see around them.
It's interesting how Lee contrasts Atticus with other adults in Maycomb,
Oh, yeah. Like who?
like Aunt Alexandra and Mrs. Merriweather.
Right.
They represent those deeply ingrained social norms and prejudices that Atticus is constantly pushing back against.
Their characters really highlight that struggle between tradition and progress.
Yeah.
Between holding on to outdated beliefs and embracing a society that's more inclusive and just.
And Alexandra is so fixated on appearances and social status.
Oh, yeah.
He's obsessed with the Finch family's good name.
Right.
Even though that reputation is built on inequality.
Hmm.
And Mrs. Merriweather, she's busy with her missionary work in far-off places.
Uh-huh.
It seems like she's more worried about looking charitable than actually addressing the racism and poverty that's right in front of her.
They're almost comically hypocritical, aren't they? They're so caught up in keeping up appearances
Right.
that they completely miss the real suffering that's going on all around them.
It makes Atticus's quiet resistance stand out even more.
It does.
He's not looking for recognition or praise. He's just doing what he believes is right, even when his own community turns against him.
He gets it,
Yeah.
He understands that real change doesn't come from big showy gestures or trying to look virtuous. It comes from those everyday choices we make to stand up for what we believe in.
Lee does such an incredible job of portraying how complex Southern society was back then.
She does.
It's not just good guys versus bad guys.
Yeah, right.
She shows us the unspoken rules, the deep-rooted racism, and those little hints of change that are starting to emerge.
The novel really captures a crucial time in American history.
It does.
When the old ways were being challenged, but the fight for equality was far from over. It reminds us that progress can be slow and difficult, and that
Mhm.
even taking a small step forward can be met with huge resistance.
And we see all of this through Scout's eyes.
Yeah.
She starts out innocent and naive,
Right.
but as she goes through all these experiences, she starts to understand the complexities of race, class, and justice.
Her journey is both heartwarming and kind of sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
We see her lose some of her innocence, but she gains a really deep sense of empathy
Yeah.
and a fierce determination to stand up for what's right.
It's a reminder that growth often comes from facing those uncomfortable truths and challenging what we've been taught by older generations.
Yeah. I never thought about it before, but the way Lee describes Macomb's founding kind of foreshadows the town's obsession with power and control.
Oh, interesting.
Remember how the town's founder did everything he could to make sure Macomb became the county seat?
Right?
It's like the town's origins are all about this desire for dominance.
That's a really good point.
Like that initial quest for power shaped the hierarchies and inequalities that are all over the town.
And the Ewells,
Yeah.
even though they're poor and don't have much social standing, they still manage to take advantage of those power structures.
Mm.
Being white gives them some level of authority, which they use to maintain their position,
Right.
even though they're at the bottom of the social ladder.
It just goes to show that power isn't always about money or social status.
Yeah.
It can be found in the ways that prejudice and privilege work, allowing some people to control others, even when they don't seem to have anything else.
The difference between Macomb and Finch's Landing becomes even more interesting when you think about this power dynamic, don't you think?
Yeah.
Macomb is stuck, trapped by its past and its obsession with power.
Right.
Finch's Landing shows us a different way of living, one that's self-sufficient, connected to the land, and not so worried about social hierarchies.
It's like Finch's Landing is a safe space, away from all the toxic stuff in Macomb.
Yeah.
A place where the Finch family can live according to their own values,
Right.
free from the town's rigid social order.
And that's where Scout and Jem spend their summers, exploring, having adventures, and figuring out the world. It's a place where they can just be kids,
Right.
without all the expectations and prejudices of adults.
It's this nurturing environment. It
Yeah.
helps them develop their independence, love of nature, and their strong moral compass. It's like Finch's Landing gives them the strength to resist Macomb's negative influence.
And we can't forget Calpurnia, the Finch family's black housekeeper.
Oh, right.
She's such a strong and interesting character, navigating a society that's so racially divided with grace and dignity.
She's way more than just a housekeeper.
Absolutely.
She's like a mother to Scout and Jem, a source of wisdom and guidance.
Calpurnia is a fascinating character.
She is.
She shows how resilient black women were in the face of so much oppression. She has to navigate two different worlds, the white world of the Finch family
Uh-huh.
and the black community Macomb.
Right.
She's constantly code switching,
Yeah.
changing how she acts to fit in with each environment.
That scene where she takes Jem and Scout to her church,
Oh, yeah.
that's so powerful.
It gives us a glimpse into a world that's completely separate from the white world of Macomb,
Right.
a world with its own traditions, values, and struggles.
It's a key scene because it shows Scout and Jem a different perspective, a different way of experiencing faith and community. It challenges what they think they know
Right.
and helps them understand the world better.
It shows all the richness and complexity of black culture,
Yeah.
something that Macomb's white society ignores.
It's a stark reminder of how real segregation was.
It is.
The fact that black and white people lived completely separate lives.
Yeah.
Separate churches, schools, even different laws.
It shows how insidious racism was, how it affected every single part of life in the Jim Crow South.
Calpurnia, in her own quiet and determined way, she challenges those boundaries. She moves between these two worlds, teaching Scout and Jem about respect, empathy, and the importance of seeing beyond superficial differences.
Another character who really stands out is Miss Maudie Atkinson.
Oh, yeah, the Finch's neighbor.
She's independent, she speaks her mind, and she's like a breath of fresh air in a town that can feel so suffocating sometimes.
Miss Maudie is great. She represents reason and compassion
Yeah.
in a community that's often driven by fear and gossip.
She's a true ally to Atticus and his kids, offering them support and guidance when they need it most.
I love her garden. It's like a symbol of her independence.
Yeah.
A place where she can cultivate beauty and joy amidst all that ugliness.
Remember when her house burned down
Oh, yeah.
and she wasn't even upset about it?
No, right? She said she always wanted a smaller house anyway so she could have a bigger garden.
So Miss Maudie.
So Miss Maudie.
That scene really shows her character, doesn't it?
It does.
She's strong, she adapts to whatever happens,
Yeah.
and she always finds the positive, even when things are tough.
She teaches Scout a valuable lesson
Right.
about finding joy and beauty even in the hardest situations.
And we can't leave out Dill,
Oh, Dill.
the summertime friend who starts so many of the kids' adventures. He might not be in the story as much as some of the other characters, but he has a big impact.
Dill's presence is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
He gets the kids exploring all those mysteries in Maycomb.
Yeah.
Their fascination with Boo Radley, their first encounters with the town's prejudice.
He's the outsider. He sees things with fresh eyes.
He does.
Not weighed down by Maycomb's history and preconceived notions. He asks those questions that Scout and Jem might not even think to ask.
Right.
And that forces them to face some uncomfortable truths.
And his own story.
Right.
With his absent parents and longing for a family, that adds another layer to the novel. It makes you think about childhood, belonging, and that search for connection. It's a reminder that everyone has their own struggles and hidden stories, even in a small town like Maycomb.
Lee does an amazing job of weaving all those individual stories together.
It's true.
It creates this rich tapestry of what life was like in Maycomb.
It's like each character represents a different part of the town. Its strengths, weaknesses, all its complexities. And through their relationships, we really understand the things that shape the community and the challenges that people face when they dare to question the status quo.
It's a story that encourages us to look beyond the surface, question what we believe, and realize how our own biases might be blinding us to the truth.
That's true.
And it reminds us that even in a place like Maycomb, where everyone knows everything about everyone else, there are still things we don't know.
Right.
Untold stories.
Yeah.
And the potential for great kindness and great cruelty.
It's a story that people still connect with today because it speaks to some basic truths about us as humans, about our ability to love deeply and be incredibly cruel. It confronts those uncomfortable realities about prejudice and justice and that fight for equality.
Right.
Things that are still so relevant today. But it also gives us hope and belief in empathy and the possibility that things can change.
Okay, so we've delved into the characters, the themes, and the societal forces that play in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
But there's still one important part of the story we need to explore. What happens after the trial and how it affects Scout, Jem, and the whole town of Maycomb.
Yeah, it's like the trial just ripped away any sense of, decency that Maycomb had, exposing all that deep-seated racism and injustice that was hidden underneath.
The trial really is this huge turning point, not just in the story itself, but for Scout and Jem as they're trying to understand their community. They go into that courtroom with this childlike belief that things will be fair.
Right.
But they come out of it with a much harsher understanding of how messed up the adult world can be.
Yeah, for sure.
Jem especially has a hard time with the verdict, doesn't he? His belief in the justice system, and maybe even in the adults around him, is totally shattered.
You can really feel Jem's disillusionment. He's old enough to get what the verdict means.
Yeah.
To understand that an innocent man was condemned just because of his race. It's like he loses his innocence, that realization that the world doesn't always work the way Atticus taught him, that fairness and equality don't always win.
And Scout, even though she might not completely understand all the legal stuff, she senses that something is very wrong. Her reaction is more gut feeling, driven by a kid's natural sense of right and wrong.
Scout's innocence is definitely tested, but it doesn't completely break. She still kind of holds on to this belief that people are good, even while she's dealing with all the hatred and prejudice aimed at Tom Robinson. It really shows how good Atticus is as a father, that she doesn't become cynical and bitter in that environment.
The trial's impact goes way beyond the courtroom, though, doesn't it? It divides Maycomb.
It does.
Some people support Atticus for defending Tom, and others condemn him for daring to challenge the way things are.
It's like the trial becomes this test for Maycomb's soul.
Right.
It shows the true colors of everyone living there, exposing their beliefs about race, justice, and how far their compassion goes.
Yeah.
Some, like Miss Maudie and Mr. Underwood, they stick by Atticus.
Right.
They show that they're committed to doing the right thing, even when it makes them unpopular. Others, They show their deep-seated prejudice, their willingness to sacrifice an innocent man to keep things the way they are.
Lee doesn't shy away from showing us how ugly that racism is, but
Yeah.
she also highlights the courage of those who speak out against it.
Right.
It's a reminder that even when prejudice is everywhere, little acts of defiance can start to change things.
And then there's Bob Ewell. Oh man, he's just the worst.
Right.
All that hatred he has for Atticus and Tom Robinson, it just eats him up. It leads to that awful attack on Jem and Scout.
Ewell's actions are a scary reminder of what can happen when prejudice goes unchecked. He represents that violence that's bubbling under the surface of Macomb's polite society. That violence that explodes when someone threatens the established order.
That attack on the kids, it's such a desperate attempt to hold on to power that he feels is slipping away.
It's revenge, yeah. But it's also a sign of something much deeper going on. That fear and resentment that fuels racism and prejudice.
And in that moment of real danger, the most unexpected hero shows up. Boo Radley. The guy who everyone's been afraid of and gossiping about, he becomes the children's protector. It's crazy how everything gets flipped around. The person Macomb calls a monster turns out to be the one who saves the kids from actual evil.
It makes you wonder about everything you thought you knew about Boo, doesn't it? It forces you to think about how fear and prejudice can twist how we see things, making something harmless seem scary.
It's so smart how Lee uses symbolism.
Yeah.
Boo, who has been hidden away from the world, comes out of the shadows to fight against that darkness that almost swallows Macomb. He becomes this symbol of hope, showing that courage and compassion can come from the most unexpected places.
And Scout, in that last scene where she walks Boo home, she finally sees him for who he really is. Not a monster, but a shy and vulnerable man who has been kind to them.
It's a really beautiful moment of empathy and understanding. Scout, who has grown so much throughout the story, lets go of the prejudice she learned from her community and recognizes the humanity in someone everyone else has rejected.
That scene is just so well written. It's like this healing moment after all the pain and injustice. It reminds you that even in the darkest times, kindness and compassion can still win.
It leaves you feeling hopeful, like maybe the next generation can learn from the mistakes of the past and create a world without prejudice and injustice.
So after this deep dive into To Kill a Mockingbird, why do you think this story still connects with people today, decades after it was first published? What makes it a classic?
I think it's because it talks about those basic things about being human, our ability to love and to be cruel.
Right.
It faces those uncomfortable truths about prejudice, injustice, and fighting for equality, things that are still happening today.
Yeah.
But it also offers hope, a belief in empathy and the possibility of change.
It reminds us that even small acts of kindness can matter, that fighting for what's right is always worth it,
Yes.
and that true courage is about fighting for justice, even when it seems impossible.
To Kill a Mockingbird is more than just a book.
Hmm.
It's a call to action, asking us to look at our own biases, to fight injustice wherever we see it, and to try to build a better world.
It's a story that stays with you, making you think and question things long after you finish reading it.
It is?
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm thinking, what if we all tried to see the world like Scout does? With her sense of wonder, her empathy, and that unshakable belief in the good in people.
Oh,
Maybe then we could really make a difference.
that's a lovely thought, and one worth holding on to as we deal with our own complicated world.
It is. Well, until next time, keep diving deep.